misogyny, misandry, and endless annoying political debates. We're not talking about every college campus in America. This is Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel is a 2019 Marvel superhero film. It was directed by Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck. So Marvel continues this thing where they take these directors who've been doing these smaller films that are really narrative driven and bringing them on board for these big feature films. And so far that's worked pretty well for them. This is the same directing duo behind Sugar, Mississippi Grind, and Half Nelson. The screenplay was written by 7 different people. Not that I care about their gender, but it was 6 ladies and 1 guy. The musical score for this film is by Pinar Toprak. This makes her the first female to do a musical score for a Marvel film. Again, that's not really something that should matter, but for some reason this movie is like a lightning rod for criticism and debate and everything else. When I sit down and watch a movie or show, I'm not there to worry about politics or misogyny or misandry or feminism or whatever. I don't give a shit. I'm there to watch a movie or show. I'm there to escape reality, okay? I'm there to live vicariously through the adventures of somebody else. So for this movie to get so politicized by Marvel and by the fan base and by the non-fan base, it's really just kind of annoying. Anyway, the movie stars Brie Larson as Captain Marvel, Samuel Jackson as a young Nick Fury, Ben Mendelsohn as the big bad Talos, and Jude Law as Jan, Captain Marvel's mentor. So this movie follows a superpowered alien named Verse, aka Captain Marvel, as she is stranded on planet Earth. She's stuck in the middle of an intergalactic war between 2 alien races, and the only way to stop this war is to team up with a young Nick Fury in the infancy of S.H.I.E.L.D. So as you guys know, when I talk about films, I talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. There's nothing really ugly about this film except, the whole political thing on the outside of the movie, and I'm not going to really get into that. I kind of touched on it already, so I've had my say. That being said, let's talk about the good. The very first thing you see in this film really touched me. It is a tribute to Stan Lee. You know, at the beginning of all Marvel movies, when the MARVEL, the logo comes up and it slowly flies through it, instead of having all the superheroes and stuff in it this time, they had all of the Stan Lee cameos from the other films and some of the stuff from his life. And as a lifelong Stan Lee and Marvel fan, that really meant a lot to me. After the Stan Lee tribute, you get to see a little bit of the Kree homeworld. Captain Marvel and the rest of her team are Kree. That's an alien race. You immediately find out that Jan and Verse have this amazing chemistry. They're good friends. He's her mentor, she's his student, and they're fighting each other. There's a lot of snappy dialogue between them. It's a fun scene. You see, the different alien races on this train that they're on going to their destination. And of course, the world is basically made of CGI, just like Wakanda is. So it's a nice little intro to them and to their world. And for the most part, the CGI in this film is solid. When they want it to look really good, it looks really good. And since Verse has amnesia, she can't really remember who she is, where she's from, what she's done. You don't know much information about her, and that's cool because she doesn't either. So as she discovers more about herself, you do as well. The Skrull are the bad guys of this film. I really like them. They had a lot of personality. I think their shape-shifting ability, where they can look like anybody else that they want to, is really nifty. The leader of the Skrull is Talos, who is played by Ben Mendelsohn. You guys know how I feel about Ben Mendelsohn. He is just awesome, and he's great in this film. And it's really cool to get to hear him speak in his native Australian accent and with the American accent. So they established that the Skrull are pretty tough foes, so that means the Kree have to be badass as well. And towards the beginning of the film, there is a great battle scene that shows you that the Kree are indeed badass. The whole first act in general is pretty killer. There's a great introduction, you get to see what's going on, what's happened a little bit, and then you get to see where it's going. So it really gets you hooked to find out what's going to happen for the rest of the film. There were a few times where they showed some military stuff in this movie, and I was actually pretty impressed at one detail. They show a scene where Brie Larson and Annette Bening are talking to each other. Both of them are wearing their Air Force jackets, and they have a little patch right here. Back in the mid-90s, when I actually joined the Air Force and when this movie takes place, all of the people in the Air Force wore that little patch. and it had your name, your rank, and your unit symbol on there. And that's something that most movies don't get right. When they show that time period, they show the old school bars and a bunch of other stuff, and we weren't using that at the time. So the fact that they got that right is pretty neat. Something else that they get right in this movie are the action scenes. They have a lot of energy. You feel the punches or the crashes or whatever it is, the explosions. The action in this movie is pretty kick-ass, and it feels a little bit different than some of the other Marvel films. During one of the battle scenes, there was a great cameo by Stan Lee. That really made me happy. It warmed my heart, but it also made me feel sad a little bit because, he passed. And he's one of my idols since I was a kid. I've loved him since way back when. So every time I see him in a Marvel movie, it just makes me happy. And to see him in this one, in the middle of this battle scene, this brutality, and then you just see him and his beautiful, funny, smiling face and him saying one of his famous lines, it really warms your heart, Something else I thought was fun was seeing a young Agent Coulson and a young Nick Fury. And they actually look legit. It doesn't look fake like a lot of the movies where they de-age people with CGI and stuff. There's maybe one shot of Coulson where he looks a little off, but the rest of them, they look great. I really love the chemistry between Nick Fury and Captain Marvel. It kind of reminded me of the movie A Long Kiss Goodnight, but obviously a lot less raunchier and stuff. It was just really fun to watch them interact and mess with each other and help each other out and discover new things together. That was one of the highlights of the movie, to be honest. It was really cool to see Samuel Jackson do some action scenes, especially given the fact that he's like 70 years old now and he's still kicking ass, which is pretty great. And at the age of 41, it gives me hope that when I'm 70, fingers crossed I make it that long, I will be just as kick-ass. And part of the fun of that dynamic was seeing Captain Marvel's fish out of water stuff, seeing her discover new things, well, really old things, because this is all stuff from the mid-90s. Stuff like how long things take to do on the computer, like loading up a disk or connecting to the internet or whatever. Now, that's stuff that I had to deal with and stuff that maybe a lot of you didn't have to deal with. You're probably younger, you're not used to that, but seeing that brought back some memories for me, the nostalgia goggles. Something I didn't see coming was the performance by Lashana Lynch as Marie Lambeau, a Cajun and one of Captain Marvel's best friends from when she was younger. She really added a lot of heart and drama to this movie. She's not in it for a long time, but every scene that she's in, she gives it, her all. The theater that I was in wasn't a fancy theater. It was still pretty nice, but it wasn't one of these big ones with Atmos and 3D and 4D and all this stuff. It was basically a standard theater, but even so, a lot of what you see on the screen, the sounds, and just the technical execution of the film was really nice. You really feel it, and it really gives you that, oh, I'm in a big movie, and it's a great feeling. There was this shift in the middle of the film, kind of towards the end of the second act, that I did not expect, and it was really nice. And I think it goes back to the fact that these two directors are kind of from the independent film scene, and they're really good at those quiet moments, those narrative moments, and they added a lot of heart, a lot of depth to the film that wasn't there yet. The way that they reveal the uses of her power and how strong she can be, which isn't nearly what they show in the film. She's way stronger in the comics and stuff. It's really interesting, and I was pretty stoked to see it. I like the music that they use around that and everything else. It's a moment of excitement, and I can imagine little girls in the audience just being like, wow, she's so cool, she's so tough, she's amazing. And I think that's neat. A lot of times I'm not a big fan of the editing or the cinematography or even the color grading in Marvel movies, but this one, it's not quite as muted as, most of the Marvel films. It's not as bright as, say, Ragnarok, but it's got a nice balance right in the middle there. And one of those times you really notice the balanced use of contrast and color grading and vibrancy and all that kind of stuff is when they reveal what her suit looks like. She wears that same suit throughout the film, but when you actually see her change it to the Captain Marvel colors, it's a pretty cool looking scene. And again, I can imagine a bunch of little girls in the audience being excited and thinking it's really cool. Because if I'm sitting there, a 41-year-old guy saying, wow, this is pretty dope, I'm sure little girls are losing their minds. And yes, I'm glad there's finally a female lead in a Marvel movie. It's about time. There's a lot of great female superheroes in the Marvel universe. But I still definitely want to see a hard R Black Widow film. Her as the assassin and all that kind of stuff, just killing people like Old Man Logan. That'd be great. Seeing how S.H.I.E.L.D. started and the infancy of the Avenger Initiative was pretty neat. I didn't realize that the movie takes place in the mid-90s because I didn't watch a lot of stuff about it or read anything about it before I saw it because I don't like to spoil things. And as with all Marvel movies, there is an after-credits scene. Definitely stay to watch that. If you're like me, you'll get excited to see how Avengers Endgame is going to turn out. But with all that good out of the way, let's talk about the bad. while I don't care about the politics that surround the movie and all that kind of stuff, when they kind of bring it into the film and put it in your face, that can kind of offset, your enjoyment of the film or take you out of it for a little bit. So when Captain Marvel first lands in the 1990s, she crashes into a blockbuster video, and the first thing she does is shoot Arnold Schwarzenegger in the face on a True Lies billboard. Now, I know what they were trying to do. They were trying to say women can be strong lead characters and all that kind of stuff. No they can. They've been for a long time, all the way back to the late 70s and even before that. But in the late 70s beyond, there's so many strong female lead characters, it's insane. So for them to shoot one of the greatest action heroes of all time, and part of the reason we've gotten these Marvel movies, because all of these big 80s action movies and sci-fi movies led up to these Marvel movies happening. If it wasn't for these guys in these big movies, we wouldn't have this type of stuff to watch. So even though it's just a cardboard cutout advertisement for True Lies, seeing that happen, I gotta be honest, it pissed me off a little bit. There is a lot of exposition in the first part of the movie, whether it be from Jan or Captain Marvel or some other characters. It's a lot of tell, not a lot of show. There are a few times in the film I noticed that maybe they did some voiceover, like someone's sound didn't come out right, and it didn't quite match with the words. I mean, that's a small nitpick, but if I noticed it, other people are going to notice it too. There is one foot chase scene in the film that's actually pretty good, but there are a couple times where one or the other actor does some parkour. Even for the small things, they used wires, and you could tell. And some of the moves that they used the wires for are really simple, so you think they would have practiced it beforehand and just had them do the stunt, because they weren't a big deal. So seeing wire foo in this movie like it's the Matrix or something was a little bit distracting. There's also a vehicle chase scene, which to me was more of an homage to The French Connection. It's a vehicle trying to chase a train. It's not done nearly as well as The French Connection. Let's be honest, what film could do that these days? None. But it's all wide shots and close-ups. There's no shots from like low to the ground or, from above the wheel or anything that gives you more of a sense of speed. There's a part in Mad Max Fury Road where Furiosa has left the compound and they're driving down the highway. They show a really cool shot of the vehicles coming at the camera, and then they show a shot that's only for a few seconds, but it's of the vehicles driving low to the ground. All you see is the road, but you can see how fast they're really going. That's what I'm talking about. They should have added something like that to this chase scene to give it more of a visceral, fast, violent feel. There's a couple times in this movie where they are way too over the top with the douchey white guy thing. I mean, I didn't get offended because I don't do or say these things that the guy said, like, you know why they call it a cockpit, don't you? Yeah, we get it, dude. That's why they call it a flight deck now, not a cockpit. Hey, baby, why don't you give me a smile? Who says that? No guy talks like that anymore. And if they do, they are a douche. They were just pouring it on so thick in this movie, like, women great, men bad. Speaking of bad, the music in this film, there's so much 1990s music. There's so many great songs and bands from the 1990s. They chose some of the worst stuff that you could think of. Like, they picked the most stereotypical mainstream crap from the 90s and said, let's put that with this scene. It'll make it really cool. Guess what? It doesn't. At one point in the movie, there's a joke where they say the word ass. It really fell flat for me, and that's because the theater or the ministry or whoever edited the word ass out. Like, why can't I hear ass, dude? I went to see a PG-13 movie. I can hear ass. Don't edit that out for me, okay? I'm not a little kid. There were a decent amount of jokes in the movie. Some of them were a little bit lame and they felt kind of flat, but for the most part, the movie is pretty funny. I like that banter back and forth between the team or between Nick Fury and Captain Marvel, but I definitely would have liked to seen a few more in there. And like the jokes, the CGI is hit or miss. There's some really beautiful CGI shots where it looks super realistic, but there are other ones that maybe they outsourced to different studios or they didn't have time or they just didn't care. They look really bad. There's some really CGI shots in this film. And speaking of CGI shows, you know how Marvel does, right? The first 2/3 or maybe even more of the movie will be pretty solid, and at the end they have to have this big, sometimes ugly CGI fight. Like Black Panther. Black Panther, the first 2/3 were pretty solid. Let's not get into the logic of some of the things, like they're this advanced civilization, but they're still doing these really old school rituals. Anyway, I digress, right? Black Panther, pretty solid most of the movie, and then it turns into this really clunky, ugly CGI fight at the end. I'm not saying that every comic book movie should keep it small or low scale or whatever like Logan, but if you are going to do this big CGI show at the end where everybody's fighting and stuff's blowing up and everything, make it look realistic all the way through, because there were some really bad shots of Captain Marvel doing her thing or her movements or whatever that just really looked out of place compared to a lot of the other shots in that same battle. Another thing that looked really bad in that battle scene was Ronan. If you guys remember in Guardians of the Galaxy, he was the generic villain, the blue guy with the hammer. He's the one that Star-Lord did the dance battle with. So he's back in this movie because, of course, this takes place in the past. But the thing is, he looks so fake. He looks so bad. It's just Lee Pace with some blue makeup splattered on his face, and that's it. Now remember, this is like 7 Marvel movies later. So how did the villain, who was pretty crappy looking in the first place, get worse than he did before? They used a really, really horrible song choice that kind of ruined the fight scene for me. The song they used was No Doubt's Just a Girl. Now, I know the movie takes place in the mid-90s, and that's when the song came out, and it's kind of symbolic of the thing. She was just a girl, and now she's just badass with superpowers or whatever. Such a bad song to use in that scene. There's so many good 90s songs from women that are strong and powerful and would really give you that, oh, she's kicking ass, not, I'm just a girl, go. Come on, dude. So all in all, Captain Marvel is really fun. It's really pretty. It has great pacing, but it's very predictable. If you didn't see that twist coming in the middle with the different characters, you weren't thinking about anything at the time, and maybe that's what they're hoping for, but it was super predictable. And of course, all the politics within and around the film are a bit annoying. I just want to tell the film studio, stop doing that. Every time you do that, you hurt the film. Ocean's 8, 2016 Ghostbusters, this movie, every time you politicize or make a movie divisive with, gender politics and that kind of stuff, you're hurting the movie. You're not making it better. Stop using the all press is good press mentality, because it's not true. When it comes to Captain Marvel, just like comic fans and little girls, go and enjoy this movie and have a good time and shut up about all these politics. All that being said, what is my score? Drum roll, please. 7 out of 10.